If that dog bites one more person, they'll put her down. I don't care whose fault it is." Kara had said it through clenched teeth, arms folded tight across her chest, as she glared through the chain-link fence. It was early morning at the county shelter, the kind of cold that settled into your bones and didn't leave even when the sun rose. Her words hung in the air, heavier than the frost. The dog in question, a mottled brown and black shepherd mix, huddled in the corner of the run. Her name was Juny, or at least that's what the volunteers had started calling her. No one knew her real name, if she even had one. She wouldn't come to it anyway. She wouldn't come to anything. She wouldn't eat if someone was watching. She wouldn't look anyone in the eye. But she would bite. Kara watched her for a long minute before exhaling slowly and rubbing her temple. Juny had been picked up 3 weeks ago wandering along Route 57, covered in fleas and burrs, with a half-healed wound on her leg that looked like it came from a snare trap. She hadn't let the animal control officer near her without a muzzle. She hadn't let the vet techs near her either. 2 had ended up in urgent care. It was bad, and it was getting worse. So what now? The question came from Will, one of the younger volunteers. He was maybe 20, kind-eyed, always trying to see the good in animals even when they growled in his face. Kara didn't want to snap at him. It wasn't his fault, but the reality loomed. "Now," she said, "we try one more time. But I'm not risking anyone else. Not again." The county shelter was over capacity. It had been for years. Dogs came in and rarely left. Adoptions were low, fosters even lower. Dogs with bite histories didn't get chances. Juny had already gotten more than most. But still, Kara watched her. She wasn't stupid. She knew that under all that fear, there was something left of the dog she must have been before. Maybe she used to sleep on a rug in someone's living room. Maybe someone brushed her coat, gave her treats, laughed at her antics. Or maybe she'd never had that. Maybe she was born into fear, learned early that people hurt and walls close in. Kara would never know. All she had was this version of her now, crouched, silent, a ghost of a dog. They tried to approach her again that morning. Kara suited up, thick gloves, padded sleeves, a calm voice. Will stood back with a catch-pole just in case. Juny didn't lunge this time. She just trembled. When Kara stepped closer, Juny's eyes tracked her, wide and wet. There was no anger in them, just terror so deep it made Kara's chest ache. It took 15 minutes, but Kara managed to clip a leash to her collar. No snarling, no biting, just a low whimper that made Kara's stomach twist. She coaxed Juny out of the run and into the small medical room where she could at least be looked over again. Her leg needed treatment. Her weight was too low. They had to do something. By noon, Kara sat behind the front desk with a half-eaten granola bar and a headache. The shelter smelled like bleach and despair. She scrolled through her phone, looking through the list of fosters and rescues. Most would say no. Some had already said no. She tapped a name near the bottom of her list. It was a long shot. But she'd seen miracles before. "Hello?" A man's voice answered, quiet but not cold. Kara took a breath. "Hi, Mr. Delaney. This is Kara Miller from the Fulton County Animal Shelter. I was wondering if you're still open to taking fosters." A pause. "I haven't in a while," he said. "Been a couple years, actually." "I understand. It's just, we have a dog. She's not doing well here. She needs someone who's patient, someone who knows how to work with fear." And I remember you took that hound mix, Nellie, I think. She was a tough case, too. There was a longer pause now. Is this one worse? Kara closed her eyes. Yes. Silence again. Kara stared out the smudged front window at the gray parking lot. Then came the words she didn't expect. All right, I'll come take a look. Tomorrow morning. When she hung up, Kara let herself smile just a little. By 9 a.m. the next day, he was there. His truck pulled into the gravel lot, just as quiet as she remembered. Peter Delaney had to be in his late 50s by now, maybe early 60s. He wore a faded flannel shirt, worn jeans, and a pair of boots that had seen 100 muddy days. He moved slowly, like a man who didn't feel the need to rush anymore. She met him outside. Thanks for coming. He just nodded. Let's see her. Kara led him to Juny's run. The dog was back in the corner, but she was watching, always watching. Peter crouched outside the fence, didn't speak, didn't reach out. He just sat. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then Juny's ears shifted forward. Another 5 minutes, and she moved. Just a few inches, barely a twitch. But Kara noticed. Peter stood. All right, he said. I'll take her. You sure? I'm sure. It took them half an hour to get Juny into the truck. She didn't bite, but she shook the whole time. Kara gave Peter a bag of food, some vet records, a muzzle just in case. He thanked her and didn't promise anything. But Kara had a feeling, a small one. It felt like hope. Peter lived out near Cresswell, past the big lake where the trees were thick and the roads unpaved. His property backed up to a patch of woods and had a long porch that wrapped around the front of his cabin. It was quiet out there, peaceful. When he brought Juny into the house, he didn't say a word, just unhooked the leash and let her be. She bolted under the table and didn't come out. That night, he left a bowl of food by the wall. She didn't touch it. The next day, he left another. It was gone by morning. He didn't push her, didn't try to pet her or call her. He went about his days, chopping firewood, fixing the porch screen, feeding the chickens. He let her watch. And she did. A week passed before she let him sit near her. 2 weeks before she took a piece of bacon from his hand. 3 before she followed him to the yard. There were setbacks. One night a storm rolled in, loud and angry, and Juny ripped the screen door trying to escape. Peter found her shaking in the woods behind the coop. He didn't grab her, just sat down nearby, humming some old song until she crept back. Each day was slow, but something changed. Peter noticed it first in her eyes, the way they softened, the way she started blinking more when he spoke, a sign she wasn't so guarded. Then it was her tail, a twitch, a flick, once when he poured kibble into her bowl. And one morning, 3 months in, she walked up and nudged his hand. He hadn't cried in years, not since his wife died. But that morning, with a shaky shepherd pressing her nose into his palm, something opened in him. He started calling her June instead of Juny. Seemed to suit her better, he said. She was still cautious, still quiet, but she stayed close, followed him on walks, slept near his bed. When he sat on the porch in the evening, she curled up by his boots. He never asked her to do tricks, never made her wear a leash, just let her be. And in return, she let him in. It was spring when Kara came to visit. She parked near the gate and saw them before she even stepped out. Peter in his rocking chair, a book in his lap. June beside him, her head resting on his knee. Kara didn't say anything at first, just watched. Peter glanced up and gave a half smile. Told you she just needed time. Kara knelt beside the dog, careful, slow. June looked at her. Not through her, at her. And Kara saw it. The change. When she reached out a hand, June leaned forward. Just a little, just enough. The next morning, the old screen door creaked open as sunlight poured across the wooden floor. Dust hung lazily in the air, catching on every ray like flecks of gold. June stretched out from her spot beneath the window, her limbs long and slow, her eyes blinking open with a kind of careful caution that hadn't quite left her, not even after months of quiet. Peter shuffled in from the back door, a thermos in one hand, his old straw hat in the other. He wore the same denim overalls and faded green flannel he had since the cold gave way to spring. He set the thermos down on the kitchen counter, whistled once, not a command, just a sound to say he was there, and waited. June stood, cautious but not stiff, and padded softly across the floor toward him. She didn't wag her tail. She didn't leap. But she looked up at him and exhaled in that soft, breathy way she had, and he reached down to scratch behind her ears. "Well, you're up early," he murmured. "Was gonna let you sleep in." She leaned in, just slightly, then walked to the back porch, waiting. He followed, and together they stepped out into the rising light of morning. The sky was wide and streaked with pink, the edges of the world still wrapped in dew. The grass in the yard was thick now, a few early dandelions poking through like tiny suns. Peter's chickens clucked lazily from their coop, still waiting on their grain. He tossed the feed in steady arcs while June stood nearby, watching the birds with alert but relaxed eyes. Her ears twitched with every movement, but she didn't chase. Not anymore. The morning was uneventful, the kind of slow, measured time that Peter had come to value since moving out here. After losing his wife, he hadn't wanted company. Not people, at least. The silence had hurt at first, but then it became a balm. The woods didn't ask anything of him. The house didn't echo with voices he missed. And now, with June nearby, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt whole. By noon, he'd cleaned out the gutters, patched the steps on the porch, and brewed another pot of coffee. June had spent most of that time lying in the shade of the tall pines near the side yard, her eyes always following him, but her body calm. She liked the outdoors. She seemed to breathe easier under open skies. Peter was sipping his coffee on the porch when the truck pulled into the drive. A cloud of dust kicked up behind it, and he squinted into the glare until the shape came into view. It was Abby. Abby Miller, Kara's younger sister, had lived in town for most of her life. She was in her early 30s, a school teacher by trade, the kind of person who always had a clipboard and extra pens in her purse. She'd helped at the shelter when she could, mostly organizing donations and coordinating volunteers. Peter hadn't seen her since the fall. He stood as she climbed out of the truck, her sun hat slipping back over her shoulders, sunglasses perched on top. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything," she called out. Peter shook his head. "Just coffee and a quiet morning. You're always welcome." June had risen to her feet, her body tense but not frozen. Abby saw her and paused. "That her?" Peter nodded. "That's June." Abby smiled gently. She crouched slowly by the edge of the porch, lowering her gaze. "Hi there, girl. I'm not gonna come closer. Just wanted to say you're beautiful." June didn't move. But she didn't bolt either. "She's come a long way," Peter said. "Kara told me. Said she didn't think there was much hope for her, but she also said, you're good at seeing what others don't." Peter chuckled softly. "Not sure about that, but I've got time. That helps." They went inside, and Peter poured Abby a glass of lemonade. They talked at the kitchen table while June lay near the back door, head on her paws, eyes half closed. Abby leaned forward after a while. "Actually, I came out here with a question. We've got this boy, Andrew, about 9, just started volunteering at the shelter with his aunt. Sweet kid, but he's had a rough year. Lost his parents in a wreck, moved in with his grandparents. Withdrawn, quiet. Doesn't talk to the other kids. Doesn't really talk to anyone, to be honest. But he seems to really love dogs." Peter listened without interrupting. "I thought maybe," Abby continued, "you could let him come visit. Just once. To see how you work with dogs like June. It might help. I think he needs to see something gentle. Something steady." Peter looked down at his hands, then toward June. "If she's all right with it, I don't mind. Bring him out next week. But if she backs off, or hides, or seems nervous, we call it." "Of course," Abby said. The visit was set for the following Saturday. Peter didn't do anything to prepare, except for cleaning up the porch and putting out an extra chair. June seemed to sense something was coming. She watched him more that week, slept closer to the front door. Her eyes stayed sharp. When the truck returned, Peter stood at the edge of the drive and waited. Abby stepped out first, and then came the boy. Andrew was small for his age, all knobby elbows and oversized sneakers. He wore a baseball cap that was a little too big, and he clutched a folded blanket to his chest. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a tight line. June didn't come to the porch. She stayed in the shade, watching. Peter gave the boy a gentle nod. "You must be Andrew. I'm Peter. That's June over there." Andrew didn't speak, but he nodded. He stood still for a while, just staring at the dog. Then, slowly, he sat down in the grass. He unfolded the blanket and laid it flat. He didn't say a word, just waited. It was nearly 10 minutes before June took a step forward, then another. She moved slow, ears alert, legs tense but not rigid. Abby watched from the truck, holding her breath. June reached the edge of the blanket and stopped. Andrew didn't move. After a long pause, he looked down and opened one hand. A treat rested in his palm. Peter didn't know where it had come from. Maybe Kara had given it to Abby. Maybe the boy had brought it on his own. June looked at the hand, then at the boy. She took one more step. Her nose touched his fingers. She took the treat. That day, she sat near him for almost an hour. Peter didn't ask questions. He just watched. Abby brought Andrew back the next week, and the next. Each time the boy laid out his blanket. Each time he waited. Each time June came a little closer, stayed a little longer. By the 4th visit, she let him touch her. It wasn't much. Just the back of her neck, a quick brush of his fingers. But Peter saw the boy's shoulders relax, saw the way he exhaled. It was like something inside him softened. That summer passed slowly. Peter worked in the yard, mended the coop, rebuilt the fence along the back acre. June followed him, sometimes leading, sometimes trailing behind. She barked at a fox once, her voice sharp and sudden. It startled them both, but Peter smiled. she was finding herself. When August came, Abby called with a new question. Andrew's therapist says he's doing better. He talks about June a lot, draws pictures of her. She asked if he could write something for a school project about his time here. Would that be all right? Peter agreed. The boy came with a notebook that weekend, sat under the oak tree, and scribbled for hours. June lay beside him. Later, Peter found one of the pages left on the porch bench. It read, "She was scared, like me. But she didn't run when I sat quiet. She watched me like she knew. I think she feels safe here. I do too." Peter folded the paper and tucked it into the back of a drawer. Fall came with colder mornings and earlier sunsets. June's coat grew thicker, her eyes calmer. She liked lying in the golden leaves. Peter bought her a new bed for the front room, though she still preferred the cool floor near the fire. In early October, Kara called. "We've got another one," she said. "Not as bad as June, but scared. Real scared. Maybe you could—" Peter glanced at June lying by the door. He thought about it. "Bring her out," he said. June lifted her head as if she knew. The story wasn't ending. It was just beginning again. The sky was layered in soft orange and pale lavender when Kara's shelter van pulled into Peter's gravel drive. The morning fog had lifted earlier than usual, leaving the air clear but sharp, the kind that carried the scent of pine and a hint of wood smoke from a nearby chimney. The tires crunched as she eased the van beside the chicken coop, careful not to disturb the quiet. Peter was already outside, as always. He stood at the edge of the porch with a mug of coffee, his hat low over his eyes. June curled up beside him. The dog's ears twitched at the sound of the engine, but she didn't move. Kara stepped out, her face unreadable but calm. She walked around the back of the van and opened the rear doors slowly. Inside was a small mutt with wiry gray fur and a long scar that cut diagonally across her flank. Her name was Millie. She was smaller than June but no less afraid. Her body was pressed flat to the kennel floor, her eyes wide and unblinking. Peter didn't speak as Kara lifted the crate and carried it toward the porch. He only stepped forward to open the screen door. "Put her in the back room," he said. "Let her rest first." Kara nodded. "She hasn't eaten in 2 days. Only drinks if no one's in the room. We'll give her time." June rose and followed them with quiet curiosity. When they reached the doorway, she stopped, watching the crate pass through like a memory being replayed. Peter noticed her tail twitch. Not a wag, not quite, but it was something. Millie didn't make a sound as she was settled into the sunroom. Peter left the crate door open. There was a soft blanket nearby, a shallow bowl of water, and a dish of boiled chicken and rice. He didn't close the door behind him when he left. He returned to the porch, where June had resumed her spot. She looked up at him. "Remember how it felt?" he said quietly. "To be that scared?" She lowered her head, not in fear, but in thought. Peter sat beside her. The next few days were slow, just as they had been with June. Millie didn't come out of the crate, not even at night. Peter left food at the edge of the blanket. June began sleeping closer to the sunroom door. By the 5th morning, the food had been touched. Not finished, but moved. June stood at the doorway a little longer that day. She didn't go in, just watched. Peter watched her. Millie stepped out of the crate for the first time on the 7th day. Peter had just finished chopping firewood when he saw her through the window, small, trembling nose in the food bowl. Her tail was tucked tight, every muscle in her body ready to flee. But she didn't. He didn't move, just watched from a distance. So did June. Over the next week, Millie started venturing farther. She never strayed more than a few feet from the back room, but she started lying in the hallway, curling beneath the window, blinking more often. Her eyes lost that sharp edge. June didn't crowd her. She never approached directly. But she stayed nearby, lying on the rug at the end of the hall or sitting at the kitchen threshold. One afternoon, Peter watched as Millie crept forward and sniffed June's tail. June didn't flinch. Abby came to visit with Andrew that weekend. The boy had grown since summer. He still carried his blanket, still wore that worn baseball cap, but his eyes had more light in them. He laid the blanket out like always, and June settled beside him without hesitation. Millie watched from the doorway, half curious, half hesitant. Abby didn't push. She brought some apple pie, sat on the porch, and caught Peter up on town news. New teachers at the school, the general store repainting its sign, a farmer down the road with a bumper crop of squash. Peter smiled politely, but his eyes kept drifting back to the yard. Millie had taken a step off the porch, then another. Andrew saw her. He didn't call to her. He didn't reach out. He just held a piece of chicken in his hand and waited. She came close, then turned away. Close again. On the third try, she took the piece and darted back to the doorway. It was a start. That night, Peter sat by the fire with June asleep at his feet. The house was quiet. A moth tapped softly against the window pane. He thought about trust. How it wasn't a gift you gave once. It was something you rebuilt, over and over, with every slow movement and every quiet day. It was in the meals left untouched, in the silences filled only with breath. It was a promise made not with words, but with presence. Millie started sleeping in the hallway by the third week. By the fourth, she followed Peter to the porch. She didn't like the coop, not yet. The chickens startled her, but she didn't hide from the sound. Peter noticed her ears began to move more, swiveling toward voices instead of flattening. Her eyes blinked when spoken to. She stopped flinching at the creak of the stairs. One cold morning, while Peter scraped frost from the porch rail, he turned to find both dogs sitting beside him. June on his right, Millie on his left. He didn't say anything, just knelt and let them lean into his hands. That afternoon, he got a call. It was from a couple who had adopted from the shelter years ago. They lived just outside of Tall Pines, ran a small bookstore, and had recently lost their elderly Labrador. They weren't looking to replace him. They said that outright. But they had room and quiet and time. Kara had told them about Millie. Peter didn't decide right away. He spent the evening walking the back trail with both dogs. Millie stayed close. June led. The woods were nearly bare now, the last leaves skittering across the ground like tiny dancers. He watched Millie carefully. She was alert, still prone to freezing when a branch snapped, but she walked steadily. She looked up when he spoke. Her tail, once glued to her belly, now hung low but loose. That night, he called Kara back. "Let's have them visit," he said. The couple came 3 days later. They were kind, soft-spoken, middle-aged. The woman had laugh lines and wore corduroy jackets. The man brought a paperback copy of a book on dog behavior, filled with sticky notes and questions. Millie didn't approach them right away, but she didn't retreat either. June watched from the porch, as if giving silent permission. After an hour, Millie stood close enough to sniff the woman's shoe. Another hour later, she let the man hand her a treat. Peter sat on the porch steps while they spoke inside. He watched the light shift across the yard. The sun was sinking, casting long amber shadows. He didn't feel anxious. He felt something else. When they left, they didn't take Millie. They wanted to give it a few more visits, make sure she was comfortable. They weren't in a rush. Peter liked that. The visits continued. Once a week, then twice. By the end of the month, Millie was riding in their car without trembling. The day she left, she walked to the vehicle on her own. She looked back once, not with panic, but with curiosity. June stood beside Peter. She didn't bark, she didn't whine, she just watched. Peter reached down and scratched behind her ears. "That's two," he said. "You're quite the teacher." They stayed that way until the van disappeared down the road. Life settled again after that. Peter returned to his routines. The fence needed mending again. The woodshed roof had begun to bow. He stacked firewood, cleared brush, patched the chicken coop. June kept close. Abby brought Andrew out for Thanksgiving. He brought a drawing this time. June and Millie, side by side under a tree. The sun drawn in thick yellow crayon. He hugged Peter for the first time before he left. December came with snow. Thick, slow flakes that blanketed the yard and turned the world quiet. Peter salted the porch steps. June chased a rabbit through the drifts, but didn't catch it. She came back with her muzzle dusted in white. One night, a fox called out near the edge of the woods. June growled low, but didn't bark. Peter stood at the door, watching the trees. The wind carried stories only the animals understood. Christmas passed without much ceremony. Peter cooked a stew, shared it with June, and listened to an old radio program while the snow fell outside. Kara called on New Year's Eve. She didn't have another dog this time. "Just wanted to say thank you," she said, "for everything you've done. For June, for Millie, for the boy. I know you don't think you're doing anything big, but you are." Peter didn't know what to say, so he just said, "Happy New Year." That night, the stars came out clear and sharp. Peter sat on the porch, June curled beside him. He looked up, sipping his coffee slowly, and exhaled into the cold. There was no fireworks show out here, no countdown. Just the sound of snow shifting on branches and the warmth of a dog pressed against his leg. And that was enough. The year turned, and life went on. Peter stood at the kitchen counter stirring a pot of oatmeal when June gave a soft bark. It was rare for her to speak unless something mattered. He turned and followed her gaze toward the window. A pale gray sedan was kicking up dust along the long gravel road. It wasn't Abby's truck. It wasn't Kara's shelter van either. Peter wiped his hands on a towel and stepped onto the porch. The morning was cold, still early enough that the frost clung to the edges of the porch railing. He watched as the car came to a stop near the gate, its engine cutting off with a faint clunk. A woman stepped out. She looked to be in her late 20s, bundled in a red coat, with a wool scarf looped twice around her neck. Her hands fumbled with something in the front seat. Then came a leash, a pink one. Peter straightened slightly. The woman opened the back door and coaxed out a dog. Small, maybe 20 pounds at most, a white terrier mix with big dark eyes and a coat matted around the legs. The dog resisted at first, digging in its paws, but the woman stayed calm, speaking gently. Peter walked down the steps. She noticed him and smiled nervously. "Hi, you must be Peter. I'm Lacey. Kara sent me. Said you sometimes help." Peter nodded. "I do what I can." "This is Daisy," Lacey said, crouching down slightly. "I adopted her about a month ago. She was doing okay at first. Then last week she bit my roommate. Just a nip, but it scared her. She wants me to give Daisy back." Peter looked at the dog. She stood rigid, tail tucked so tight it nearly disappeared. Her ribs showed slightly. There was a pink harness wrapped around her chest, loose in some spots, too tight in others. Lacey sighed. "I don't want to give her up, but I'm out of my depth. I've never had a dog like her. Kara said maybe you could, I don't know, show me how to help her?" Peter crouched slowly, not to reach for the dog, but to level his gaze. He watched Daisy without speaking. She trembled, but she didn't bolt. "She'd need time," Peter said. "Patience, and a quieter place than what she's used to. I can help you get started, but it's not quick." "I have weekends off," Lacey said quickly, "and I could come after work twice a week, just to learn. I'll do anything." Peter stood and nodded once. "Leave her with me for a few days. Come back Saturday. We'll start then." Lacey looked relieved. "Thank you, really, thank you." She crouched to whisper something to Daisy, kissed the top of her head, and handed Peter the leash. June stood at the edge of the porch, watching silently. The first 2 days, Daisy barely moved. She stayed in the corner of the sunroom, under the old writing desk, only creeping out at night to drink. Peter didn't try to lure her. He simply let her see the rhythm of the house. June passed by the doorway often, but never approached directly. Peter noticed her glance more than once in Daisy's direction, ears forward but relaxed. By the third morning, Daisy was curled at the far end of the hallway. By the fifth, she had taken food from Peter's hand. Saturday came, bright and bitterly cold, the kind of morning where breath hung long in the air. Lacey's car returned just after 8. She stepped out holding a notebook. Peter offered her a seat on the porch. June lay nearby. Daisy sat just inside the doorway, watching. "First lesson," Peter said. "Don't expect too much, too fast." Lacey nodded. They spent the morning watching the dogs move through the yard. Peter spoke softly, explaining Daisy's body language, the way her ears turned when she was nervous, the way her paws shifted when unsure. "She wants to trust you," he said. "But she's learned that people mean pain or noise or sudden movement. You have to be something different." Lacey watched Daisy with a furrowed brow. "How do I teach her that?" "Not by teaching," Peter replied. "By showing, repeatedly, slowly, every day." They sat for hours. Lacey asked questions. Peter answered. June wandered in and out, sometimes brushing close to Lacey, other times resting by the fire. Over the next few weeks, Lacey returned again and again. Sometimes she brought Daisy home for a night, then brought her back. Eventually, Daisy stayed longer at Lacey's place. Peter noticed the changes in the dog's body, more confidence, less stiffness, an occasional tail wag. Lacey changed too. Her voice became softer, her movements more considered. She learned when to wait, when to encourage, when to simply et. One afternoon in late January, Lacey pulled into the drive with a wide smile on her face. "She followed me into the park," she said breathlessly. "No leash, just followed me the whole trail. And when a bike passed us, She didn't panic. She just stood close. Peter nodded with quiet satisfaction. She's beginning to believe the world isn't out to hurt her. Lacey looked down. Thanks to you. Peter shook his head. Thanks to time. Thanks to her. You just gave her space to heal. Daisy started staying at Lacey's full-time after that. She still visited the cabin often, hopping out of the car and rushing toward June with a joy that once seemed impossible. June tolerated her with the quiet patience she'd learned from Peter. The two dogs would sit under the oak tree, side by side, watching the wind move through the branches. February brought more snow, thicker this time, coating the landscape in silence. Peter began preparing for spring early, sharpening tools, organizing the shed, laying out seed catalogs. One evening, Abby called with news. "They're funding a new program," she said excitedly. "Through the school district and the shelter. A therapy initiative. Dogs like June and Millie, dogs who've come through trauma, being matched with kids who need emotional support. It's small, but Kara's on board, and they want to know if you'd consider being part of it." Peter was quiet. "I'm not sure June would enjoy being around lots of people," he said slowly. "They wouldn't push her," Abby said. "Just a few visits, calm settings, maybe with Andrew's class first. The goal is healing through presence, through quiet companionship." Peter looked at June, sleeping by the fire. "I'll think about it." The next morning, he took June on a walk down the back trail. The snow crunched underfoot, and the trees stood like sentinels. At one point, they paused near the stream, frozen in parts, still gurgling beneath the ice. Peter crouched beside her. "You've come a long way, girl, but only if you want to share that with others." June pressed her nose into his coat sleeve. 2 weeks later, they made their first visit to the school. It was small, just Andrew's class, 12 students, each seated in a circle with wide eyes and quiet hands. Peter sat in the center with June. He let her choose her path. She sniffed a few backpacks, sat near one girl's boots, then eventually walked to Andrew and curled at his side. No one clapped. No one cheered. But the room exhaled as one. The program expanded slowly. One classroom became 2. Then small groups of children came to the shelter to meet dogs being rehabilitated. June became a gentle constant in many of their visits. Peter never sought credit. He stayed on the sidelines, offering quiet instructions, watching how the children changed in the presence of a creature who had once known nothing but fear. One spring afternoon, Peter stood near the coop, fixing a section of the fence when he heard a familiar voice. "Peter!" He turned to see Lacey striding up the drive, Daisy bounding behind her off-leash. "I just got accepted to a training program," she said, out of breath, "to become a certified animal behaviorist. It's part-time, but I want to help dogs like Daisy, like June, like Millie. I want to do what you do." Peter smiled, setting his hammer aside. "That's good news. I wouldn't have even thought about it if it weren't for this place." He nodded. "Then keep going. The world needs more of that." Daisy ran to June, her tail wagging in wide arcs. The two dogs bumped shoulders, then sat beneath the oak, as if nothing else existed. The porch light flicked on as dusk settled. Peter stood, watching the dogs, the land, the cabin bathed in gold. He didn't say much. He rarely did. But something in the way June looked up at him, eyes steady, body at ease, said more than any words could. Trust wasn't a finish line. It was something you built every single day. and tomorrow he'd begin again. Peter woke to the sound of rain tapping gently against the windows. It had started sometime in the night, and by morning, the yard was blanketed in soft fog, the kind that blurred the trees and wrapped the porch in a hush. The kind of day that made everything feel slower, quieter. June stirred beside the fireplace, lifting her head just enough to check the window before resting it again on her paws. The old cabin creaked slightly as Peter moved through the kitchen, the floorboards familiar beneath his steps. He made coffee, the scent warming the air, and toasted a slice of bread on the iron skillet. He cracked the kitchen window open a few inches to listen to the rain. June rose when the food hit the plate. She stretched, walked over, and stood patiently while Peter set down her breakfast. He gave her a pat on the shoulder and looked out across the yard. He had planned to finish reinforcing the chicken coop that day, but the rain would make the ground too slick. Instead, he pulled his notebook from the drawer near the fireplace and settled into the old rocking chair. The notebook wasn't full of writing, just a few lines here and there. Names, notes, bits of advice he'd learned over the years. On the latest page, he wrote, "Daisy, softened. Lacey, found purpose. Trust, then train." By mid-morning, a truck rolled up the drive. Peter recognized it as Abby's, but she wasn't alone. A man stepped out beside her, a boy, really, though tall and broad-shouldered, early 20s with a mop of straw-colored hair under a hooded sweatshirt. He looked uncomfortable. Abby waved as they approached. Peter stepped out to meet them. "This is Mason," Abby said. "He just started working part-time at the shelter. Grew up around here. His family runs the farm past Crescent Hill." Peter nodded. Mason offered a brief handshake. "He's good with the younger dogs," Abby continued. "But Kara thought he could learn a lot from you. We were hoping you wouldn't mind if he spent some time here. Maybe get a feel for what it means to work with the tougher ones." Peter gestured toward the porch. "Got coffee on the stove. Come in." The boy followed, shoulders stiff but eyes alert. June watched from the rug near the fire, ears up but relaxed. She didn't approach. She didn't need to. Peter poured a second cup and handed it to Mason. The boy took it with a quiet thanks. "You ever worked with a scared dog?" Peter asked. "Some," Mason said, "but nothing like what Kara described. I mostly help with cleaning and walking. The big ones usually get assigned to someone else." Peter nodded slowly. "That's because most people want fast results. Fear doesn't work that way." Mason looked over at June. "That her?" "She was the first." Mason crouched a little, not close, just enough to meet her eyes without threat. She blinked. He blinked back. "That's a good start," Peter said. They spent the rest of the day talking about body language, pacing, tone of voice. Peter showed him the hand signals he used, the space he always gave, the patience it required. Mason didn't say much, but he listened. Really listened. That week, he came back twice more. He arrived early, helped with chores, asked questions. Peter began to notice him anticipating things, when a dog was about to shy away, when the moment was right to speak, or when silence would do more. On his 5th visit, Mason brought a dog with him. Her name was Wren. She was long-legged, with a lean frame and golden fur dulled by dirt and stress. Picked up near the edge of town, she'd been living under an abandoned trailer for weeks. No collar, no chip, and no history anyone could trace. Peter watched as Mason led her from the truck. She pulled hard on the leash at first, then froze entirely when she saw June. Peter stayed silent, letting the moment speak. She's nervous around other dogs, Mason said. Even the calm ones. Peter watched Wren closely. Her head was low, eyes darting between June and the porch. June sat still, unmoving, not even looking directly at the dog. Just there. Present. Peter stepped forward and took the leash. Leave her here. We'll start slow. Mason hesitated. Are you sure? She won't be pushed. That's the key. You just have to let her breathe. Mason nodded and got back in his truck, watching through the window until Peter waved him off. Wren didn't move much the first day. She paced the edge of the yard for hours, then sat under the porch steps, eyes wide and watchful. June approached once, stopped 10 feet away, and lay down facing sideways. She stayed like that until Wren eventually curled up beneath her hiding spot. That night, Wren didn't touch her food until Peter left the room. The next morning, it was gone. The rhythm of the house adapted. Peter moved through his routine with June trailing him and Wren just behind, always a step removed. She began watching June closely, how she responded to sounds, how she came when Peter called softly, how she walked freely without a tether. A week in, Wren let Peter touch her shoulder for the first time. She didn't lean into it, but she didn't pull away. When Mason returned the following Saturday, he noticed the change immediately. She looks lighter, he said. Peter gave a small nod. Trust does that. It's not just about the dog. It's about what they see in us. The weather shifted again mid-March. The snow melted from the high slopes, and rivulets of water carved paths through the yard. Trees stretched in every direction, their branches reaching higher each day, tiny buds promising spring. Peter spent more time in the shed, tuning tools, checking the garden fence. June stayed close as always. Wren, still cautious, followed at a wider distance. But she was there. One morning, Peter opened the door to find her sitting by the porch, looking up. He opened the screen, stepped back, and watched her walk in without a sound. That day, Mason returned with questions. Peter showed him how to use voice modulation to soothe the dog's fear. He explained how to wait out a moment of hesitation rather than push through it. Mason listened, absorbed everything, and then tried it himself. June watched it all. Wren started responding more to Mason after that. She came when he crouched low and tapped the ground. She let him slip the leash on without flinching. On their next walk through the woods, she walked beside him instead of trailing behind. That week, Kara called. "We've been approved for a feature in the local paper," she said. "The therapy program, the foster turnarounds. They want to write about June." Peter hesitated. "She doesn't like cameras." "They won't push her," Kara said. "They'll just talk to you. Maybe take one picture if she's comfortable. You don't have to say yes." Peter looked at June, who was dozing near the window. "Let's meet them here," he said, quietly. The reporter came a few days later, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a notepad she barely looked at. She asked about the beginning, how June came to the shelter, what made Peter take her in. "I didn't have a plan," Peter said. "I just had space and time." He talked about Millie, about Daisy, about the slow work of rebuilding trust. When the woman asked what made June different, Peter didn't answer right away. He looked over at the dog, who had moved to sit beside the fire. "She helped me as much as I helped her," he said finally. "Maybe more." The article came out the following week. It was short, simple, full of quiet reflections and moments that wouldn't have meant much to anyone who hadn't seen them firsthand. There was a photo, June sitting beneath the oak tree, her eyes calm, the sunlight making her coat glow. Mason brought a copy out to the cabin. Abby dropped off extra clippings for the school bulletin board. Lacey framed a print and sent it with a card that read, "Because of you." Peter didn't hang the article. He folded it and slipped it into the back of his notebook. Spring fully arrived in late April. The yard filled with birdsong, the trees greened, and Peter tilled the garden beds. He planted squash, carrots, beans, and a single row of marigolds along the edge. June and Wren lay in the sun, half dozing, watching him work. Occasionally, one would rise, stretch, and pace the edge of the garden before settling back down. Mason began visiting twice a week. He brought a different dog once, an old spaniel with cloudy eyes and bad hips. Peter helped him set up ramps for the dog and showed him how to massage the joints with warm hands and calm words. By now, Mason moved with confidence. His voice had softened. His eyes watched more. "You ever think about running your own place?" Peter asked one morning. Mason looked surprised. "Me? You've got the instinct. All you need is a space." Mason looked out over the trees. "Maybe someday." Peter smiled. "The world's always got room for one more who pays attention." The cabin felt full these days. Not crowded, but full. There was movement, life, a rhythm that extended beyond the walls. Peter kept a second notebook now. In it, he recorded the names of every dog who passed through. June, Millie, Daisy, Wren. Others who stayed a night or a week, who needed only a short bridge between where they'd been and where they were going. On the last page, he wrote a single line: "Trust isn't the goal, it's the path." And every morning, with the dogs beside him and the porch wrapped in dawn light, he began again. By early May, the mornings came earlier. Birds made their rounds in the low branches, darting in and out of the green as the sun filtered through a misty golden haze. Peter had never needed an alarm clock out here. The land woke him naturally. And lately, he found himself rising even before the kettle began to hum. June met him at the back door, her posture alert but unhurried. She gave a soft chuff, a habit she'd developed in the past year, as if to greet the air itself. Wren emerged moments later, slower to stir, stretching like a cat before trailing the scent of the morning breeze down toward the edge of the tree line. Peter stood for a moment on the porch, one hand resting on the weathered railing, letting the silence settle around him. He watched the dew bead along the fence and felt a calm he couldn't name. Then he walked to the shed and gathered his tools. The garden fence needed reinforcement after the raccoons had pressed their luck the night before. By mid-morning, the sky had cleared entirely. The earth smelled sweet and damp, and Peter found himself pausing now and then, hands on hips, just watching the world go by. There was no urgency anymore. Everything that needed doing would get done in its time. A truck rumbled up the road around 11. He recognized it as Mason's before the wheels even stopped turning. The young man stepped out, waving, and opened the back door of the cab to reveal a lanky dog with a narrow face and long legs. "This is Birch," Mason called out. "Picked him up yesterday. Wouldn't come out of the crate for 6 hours." Peter set down the post driver. "You bringing him to stay?" "Just for a few days. Shelter's full, and he's not doing well around the noise. Figured I'd try what's worked before." Birch stepped hesitantly onto the gravel, ears flat, tail down. His body seemed to carry something left over, a weight not easily named. He paused halfway to the porch and looked at June, then Wren. Neither dog moved. Peter had long learned that introductions didn't need fanfare, just space. Mason stayed most of the day, helping with the garden, laying new straw along the bean beds. Peter let him lead. The rhythm was easy, punctuated by birdsong and the scrape of rakes. By late afternoon, Birch had made his way to the edge of the yard and lay beneath the wide-limbed oak tree. June lay nearby, not facing him, but near enough to say, "You're not alone." Mason stood beside Peter as the sun dipped toward the west. "Every time I come here, something changes," he said. Peter nodded. "That's how healing works. Slow, quiet, often unnoticed until it's already happened." Mason looked toward Birch. "Do you think it ever fully goes away? The fear?" Peter thought for a long while. "No, but it stops being the loudest thing." 3 days passed. Birch began eating without hesitation. He didn't flinch at the back door creaking open. He followed June along the garden's edge like a shadow learning to stretch. One afternoon, while Peter was splitting firewood, he glanced up and saw something he hadn't expected. Birch had approached the porch and curled up next to Wren. She didn't move, just shifted slightly, allowing the space. It was small, barely a breath. But Peter smiled. That evening, Lacey visited with Daisy. The two dogs raced along the fence line like long-lost siblings. Peter and Lacey shared a quiet meal on the porch, passing warm bread and tomato stew back and forth while the dogs played in the golden light. "I've been thinking about leaving my day job," Lacey said after a while. "There's an opening at the shelter. Full-time. Behavioral coordinator. Kara says she'd train me. I'd get to work with the ones who've been through it." Peter sipped his tea. "Seems like you already are." Lacey looked toward Daisy, who had just flopped onto her side with a satisfied sigh. "I'm scared." "Means you're about to grow." She smiled, then leaned back and looked out across the trees. "You ever think about writing all this down? Everything you've seen, everything you've learned?" Peter shook his head. "Never needed to." "Well," she said gently, "maybe someone else does." The conversation stayed with him after she left. That night, as rain pattered softly on the roof, Peter opened his notebook and began scribbling in the margins. Not stories, exactly, just small truths, pieces that had taken root over time. He wrote, "The scared ones don't need fixing. They need someone who stays." The next week, Birch went home with Mason. He didn't need to stay long. Whatever he had come to find, he had found enough of it to carry forward. June watched him go without sadness. Peter had learned that dogs often understood more than humans gave them credit for. A few days later, Peter received a letter, handwritten, careful script. "Dear Peter, you don't know me, but I adopted Millie last year. I just wanted to thank you. She's become my shadow, my comfort, my laughter on quiet days. Whatever you gave her, it lasted. And she gave it to me in return. Gratefully, Clara Henderson." He read the letter twice. Then he folded it and placed it inside his notebook beside the article clipping. June nuzzled his hand as he closed the cover. Spring warmed. The lilacs near the fence bloomed, their scent drifting into the open windows. Peter spent his mornings on the porch again, notebook on one side, coffee on the other. On one of those mornings, Abby stopped by. She wore a raincoat, though the sky had already cleared. "School wants to expand the program," she said as she stepped onto the porch. "They want to make it permanent, add more classes, partner with the county, maybe even a therapy garden with shelter dogs helping students plant and grow things. Kara's calling it Healing Roots." Peter smiled faintly. "That's a good name." "They want you involved, not just as a mentor, officially. They asked if you'd be willing to consult, maybe even host a few workshops." Peter leaned back in his chair. He looked out across the yard where June and Wren were rolling in the grass. He thought about Andrew, about Lacey, about Mason, about the small notebook growing heavier with each name. "I'm not much for public speaking," he said finally. "They're not asking for speeches, just presence, maybe a few words. Your kind of teaching, the quiet kind." He nodded once. "All right, let's see where it goes." The days grew longer. The light lingered over the horizon, stretching the evenings into amber and violet. Peter repaired the barn roof one shingle at a time. He built a new bench for the edge of the garden and planted zinnias beside it. June lay beside him as he worked, and sometimes Wren joined her. Mason visited with Birch every Saturday, and the two dogs greeted each other like old friends. Abby brought students to the shelter garden, and Peter went once a month to help them learn to wait, to watch, to meet dogs in silence. One morning he found a boy named Leo sitting on the ground beside a skittish beagle. The dog was shaking, but Leo didn't touch her. He simply sat, eyes closed, whispering a story about a boat in a storm. Peter stood at a distance, unnoticed, and watched both of them breathe. He smiled. When he returned home, he wrote in his notebook, "Listening is the first act of love." Later that week, he was walking through the woods when June stopped suddenly. She sniffed the air, body alert but not alarmed. Then Peter heard it, a faint whimper, thin and high. They followed the sound past the fence line to a hollow beneath a fallen tree. There, curled up and shivering, was a small puppy. Barely old enough to walk, fur matted, belly round from worms. Someone had left it there, hidden away and forgotten. Peter knelt slowly. June approached first, tail low, ears forward. The puppy whimpered once more and reached out with a paw. Peter wrapped the pup in his jacket and carried it home. They named her Maple. That night, with the pup asleep in a box by the fire and June curled nearby, Peter wrote a single sentence. "No one is beyond saving." Outside, the stars emerged one by one, each quiet and unassuming, but together casting enough light to find your way home. And in the stillness, Peter felt it, the steady, growing warmth of a life built on showing up, on staying close, on letting the broken ones lead the way. Maple turned out to be louder than she looked. Within 3 days of arriving at the cabin, the tiny puppy had figured out how to bark, whimper, growl, and howl, all in bursts so short and sudden that June sometimes stood up just to stare at her. Wren, ever patient, would walk away when Maple rolled toward her on unsteady legs, yipping like she had something important to say. And Peter, who hadn't dealt with a true puppy in more than a decade, found himself reading old articles at the kitchen table by lamplight, nodding slowly as if rediscovering a language he once knew. Maple needed constant warmth at night, and for the first week she slept in a box near the fireplace with blankets that smelled like June. By the second week, she was climbing out of the box on her own and wandering the living room looking for company. June tolerated her with a kind of knowing dignity. When Maple would crawl onto her side, teeth gnawing gently at her fur, June would let her for a few minutes, then get up and relocate, leaving the puppy to figure out boundaries all over again. Peter chuckled often during those days. Maple had brought a wildness back to the cabin, something chaotic but undeniably alive. She would trip over her own feet, chase shadows, steal socks. But she also cuddled close when the wind howled through the trees, and she whimpered in her sleep like her dreams had not yet been emptied of fear. He wasn't sure how long she'd stay. Maybe just long enough to get strong. Maybe longer. He didn't press the thought. There was a rhythm now, an openness to what came. His work with the Healing Roots program had settled into something steady, with students coming every Tuesday and Thursday, a rotation of soft-spoken teenagers and curious elementary kids who had been through their own kinds of storms. One boy in particular, named Eli, had come out 3 times in a row and always sat in the same spot, near the edge of the garden, legs crossed, hands in his lap. He didn't speak much, not even to the other students, but the dogs noticed him. Wren would often settle beside him, her body turned just enough that their shoulders nearly touched. On the 4th visit, Peter walked over and sat on the low bench beside him. Maple had followed and was now attempting to crawl up onto Peter's boot. "She likes you," Peter said. Eli looked down at the puppy and smiled faintly. "She doesn't stop moving," Eli whispered. Peter nodded. "That's how she figures out the world. Movement's her language." Eli was quiet for a while, then asked, "How do you get them to listen to you?" "I don't," Peter replied. "Not at first. First, I listen to them." Eli looked puzzled. Peter continued, "When someone's scared, they need to feel heard before they can hear you back. Dogs included. Especially dogs." Eli didn't respond, but the boy's shoulders seemed to soften. Maple plopped herself down next to his leg and fell asleep. Later, Abby would tell Peter that Eli had opened up for the first time that evening, told a staff member at school that he wanted to come back to the garden, that he felt calm there. Peter didn't mark the moment with anything big. He just wrote in his notebook that night, "Listening is how trust begins, even when no words are spoken." Mid-May brought visitors more frequently. Kara began sending students from a nearby county school as a pilot program. Peter adjusted, built a small wooden shelter at the edge of the property with Abby's help. It became a quiet space, just a bench and a roof open on all sides, where students could sit with the dogs in stillness. June often lay there in the mornings now. Maple would climb onto the bench, fall asleep, then roll off with a thump that didn't even wake her. Peter added a small wooden sign above the entrance, "Quiet Hearts Welcome." One afternoon, Mason came by with Birch, grinning as he stepped out of the truck. "You'll never believe what he did yesterday," he said. "We went to the farmer's market downtown. Crowds, music, everything. He didn't flinch once, just stuck by my side, calm as anything." Peter raised an eyebrow. "That's a big change. Honestly, I think the dog's steadier than I am now." They laughed, and Peter offered him a cold lemonade. They sat on the porch while the dogs sprawled in the shade. "You ever regret staying here?" Mason asked. "Living out here alone?" Peter thought about it. "Not once I stopped trying to fill the silence." Mason nodded. "I think I used to be scared of quiet. Now I miss it when I'm in town too long." They watched Maple try to dig under a tree root. She sneezed twice, then trotted off like she'd accomplished something. "You think she's staying?" Mason asked. Peter shrugged. "I think she'll tell us when she's ready to go." One day, a new dog arrived from the shelter. Her name was Rosie, a senior retriever mix with soft eyes and a limp from an old injury. Kara called ahead, asking if there was space. Peter said yes, as he always did. Rosie didn't need much. She took to the cabin like she'd always known it, curling into the corner near the window, watching with quiet interest as Maple bounced around her like a whirlwind. June tolerated Rosie with the same grace she extended to everyone. Wren seemed almost protective, walking near her on trails, sitting close in the evenings. Rosie liked music. Peter discovered this accidentally one evening while tuning the radio. An old piano ballad came on, and Rosie let out a contented sigh, placing her head on her paws. Peter wrote in his notebook that night, "Some hearts heal through sound, even if no one else hears it." As summer began to hint at its arrival, the trees became thick with green, and wildflowers grew in bursts near the fence line. The mornings came with bees buzzing, the afternoons with distant thunder, and the evenings with frog song. One morning, Abby arrived with a surprise. She opened her trunk to reveal a stack of printed pages. "You're writing," she said. "Kara helped me type it all up. I think it's time we share it." Peter frowned. It was never meant for anyone else. "I know," she said gently, "but maybe someone like you will read it. Someone who doesn't know yet that staying still is also a kind of action." She handed him the bundle. The top page had a title in plain font. "They said the dog would never trust again." Then she saw him. Peter sat on the porch after she left, June by his side, the wind moving the trees in long, sweeping arcs. He didn't know what would come of it. He didn't need to. He had his days, the porch, the dogs, the garden. He had students who returned again and again to sit in the quiet, to find breath and calm and the slow magic of simply being seen. That evening, he cooked stew with carrots from the garden. The dogs gathered near the hearth as he stirred the pot, the scent filling the room. Later, he sat by the fire, Maple asleep on one foot, Wren against his other leg. Rosie had claimed the soft rug. June, as always, kept her eyes on the door. Peter added one more line to the notebook. "Trust isn't taught. It's remembered, one safe moment at a time." Outside, the air was thick with the scent of lilacs and earth. The night was just beginning, and so was everything else. The summer days unfolded in long golden stretches. The cabin seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the land. Bees hovered above the clover patches. Breezes stirred the long grass, revealing hidden trails worn by paws. June lay on the porch most mornings, head on her front paws, eyes half closed. Maple had grown quickly, losing some of her clumsiness, but none of her curiosity. She darted from corner to corner of the property, chasing leaves, barking at dandelion seeds, and attempting to catch dragonflies she had no hope of reaching. Peter watched her with a kind of fond amusement, the way someone might watch a child discover the shape of the world. He had long stopped wondering what tomorrow might bring. The days came as they were, and he met them as himself, quiet, measured, and grateful for every soft breath that didn't have to be earned through struggle. One Saturday in June, the Healing Roots program brought a group of older teens from a nearby residential home. These weren't kids who chatted in groups or skipped across the yard. These were the ones who walked alone, eyes tired, movements slow and practiced. Peter recognized their energy. He had seen it in the early days of every dog who'd passed through. The group came in the early afternoon, guided by Abby and a young counselor named Reese. They brought notebooks and sat quietly in the garden. The dogs approached one by one. Wren first, then Rosie. Maple barked once, then settled beside a girl with auburn hair and torn sneakers. June waited by Peter's side, her gaze scanning them all. Peter didn't speak much. He let the dogs do the introductions. A boy named Jonah crouched low near the tomatoes. Wren walked over and sat, uninvited, against his side. He didn't look at her, but he stayed still. Later, Reese said quietly, "He doesn't let anyone that close, not even staff." Peter gave a small nod. "It's not about proximity, it's about permission." Wren asked, and he let her. That's a step. Another girl, Sky, wrote something in her journal that day and left the page folded on the bench. Peter found it that evening. It read, "I didn't know I was allowed to be quiet and still be seen." He tucked the note between the pages of his old notebook. The days blurred a little after that. One evening spilled into another, and Peter found his porch light on later and later. Mason returned with Birch to help repair a section of the trail that had washed out during a storm. They worked slowly, stopping often to sip lemonade and watch the sky shift from amber to violet. Mason told him he'd applied to start coursework online, something about animal behavioral therapy, combining it with community work. "I figured if this place can change how I see everything, maybe I can help other places feel like this too," he said. Peter gave a nod. The world needs more of that. Maple had begun sleeping on the porch beside June at night. Sometimes, in her sleep, she'd let out tiny yelps or kick her legs like she was running in dreams. June would lift her head, nudge her gently, then rest beside her until she stilled. Peter watched them from the doorway and felt something settle in his chest. In July, Rosie began slowing down. The limp grew more pronounced. She needed help climbing the steps. Her eyes were still warm, still present, but there was a heaviness to them, a kind of peaceful fatigue that Peter recognized. She'd found safety, and sometimes safety was all a soul needed to let go. On a soft, overcast morning, Peter lay beside her on the rug near the window. June sat close. Wren licked Rosie's ear. Maple stood confused, quiet. Rosie passed just after sunrise, surrounded by silence and warmth. Peter buried her beneath the old oak tree, the one with the wide arms that had sheltered so many. He didn't mark it with a stone, just planted a patch of wildflowers. The dogs sat nearby as he worked. No one barked, no one ran. It was the kind of grief that felt like love with nowhere to go. Abby brought over a pie the next day, but didn't speak about Rosie. She just sat with Peter on the porch, sipping sweet tea and watching the bees drift over the garden. "She was home," Abby said quietly. "She was," Peter replied. Later that week, a letter arrived in the mail. It was addressed in blocky handwriting. The ink smudged slightly as if the writer had held the pen too tightly. "Dear Peter, you don't know me, but I was in the group that visited your place last month. My name is Jonah, the boy by the tomatoes. I didn't say anything then, because I didn't know how, but I wanted to say thank you. That day was the first time I didn't feel like I had to protect myself. That dog, Wren, I think, she didn't ask for anything. She just stayed. I've been trying that. Just staying. It's harder than it looks. But I'm trying. Thank you for letting me sit in your quiet." Peter folded the letter and placed it beside Sky's note. Summer deepened. The garden exploded with green. Abby helped harvest beans. Maple chewed through 2 hose nozzles. June swam in the pond for the first time in a year, letting the water wash the dust from her aging joints. Wren led her back to the shore like a silent shepherd. Peter built a small enclosure near the back fence, a shaded space with a soft bed and a gate. A place for dogs newly arrived, not quite ready for the cabin, but needing somewhere safe to land. He didn't call it a kennel. He didn't call it anything. In August, Kara came by with a small brindle puppy who'd been found on the side of the road. She had one eye and a tremor in her back leg. They named her Dory. She stayed in the enclosure for a week, then slowly made her way to the porch, then inside. She followed Maple everywhere, copying her movements, learning when to pause, when to nap, when to approach. June let her crawl onto the edge of her blanket without protest. One morning, Peter opened the front door to find all 4 dogs lined up at the threshold: June, Wren, Maple, and Dory, waiting, together, quiet. He smiled, stepped aside, and let the day begin. The visits from students slowed as the school year ended, but some returned on their own, even without the program. Lacey came to help with the fence. Mason brought supplies. Abby started organizing a small weekend retreat for kids who'd graduated from the Healing Roots program. They called it the Quiet Weekend. Peter didn't do anything special for it. He set out extra blankets, stacked firewood, and made soup in a big pot. The dogs handled the rest. The teens who came walked the trails, planted seeds in the new beds, and lay in the grass with the dogs. They didn't ask questions. They didn't try to explain themselves. They just stayed. And that was enough. On the final night, Peter sat by the fire pit, with the group gathered around him. The stars above blinked slowly, the trees whispering their familiar song. One of the teens, a girl named Avery, asked, "Why did you start all this?" Peter looked into the flames. "I didn't." They waited. "I just made space. The rest happened because others stepped into it." They were quiet for a long while after that. Then someone passed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it later that night. "Thank you for showing me that stillness is brave." By the end of August, the trees had begun their slow turn toward gold. Peter spent more time sitting than working. He watched the dogs move through the yard like a symphony of soft movements and quiet energy. Maple had become the bridge now, welcoming, energetic, fearless in her affection. Dory followed her everywhere. Wren still watched the woods as if listening for something distant. June stayed close to Peter, slower now, but present. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Peter sat on the porch with his notebook open. The last page was nearly full. He wrote, "She taught me that healing isn't a task. It's a presence, a series of shared silences and patient waiting, a moment where one creature sees another and chooses to stay." He looked over at June. Her eyes met his, and he knew she understood. The crickets began their evening song. The wind rustled through the leaves. The porch light flicked on, casting a soft circle around them. The world kept spinning, but in that moment, in that cabin tucked deep in the quiet, everything was exactly as it needed to be. Peter closed the notebook. Then he leaned back in his chair, the dogs at his feet, and let the night carry them gently forward into whatever would come next.